G'day everyone, welcome back to my channel. I was hoping by now to be able to show you a video doing the next lot of work on the bus, but as you can see I'm sitting here in the shed and there's just a big empty space and my bus isn't here. And that's because it's still in the shop and I'm still waiting for the repairs to be finished. It's been getting all the windows tinted. It had a little bit of rust around the windscreen that I was getting fixed. And also the driver's door wasn't closing properly, so all of that needed to be sorted out. They're just waiting on a part. The door actually needs a new lock, so we've been waiting for that to come in. Hopefully that's going to arrive today, so fingers crossed I'll be able to pick up the bus tomorrow and get back to work on it. But I thought I would do another video in the meantime about the windows, because if you've been watching my videos you'll know the last big job I did on the bus was taking all the windows out to replace the rubber seals. And I've been getting a few questions about it, and there were some things that I learned during the process of doing that would have been really good to know before I started. So I thought I would make this video to share some of the tips that I learned, things that I wish I'd known before I started taking out the windows. In case you're looking to do this yourself, you might find some of this helpful. So I'm just going to start right in. Tip number one is make sure you have plenty of space to work in. I mean, I know it sounds obvious, but we do need a fair amount of room to do this job. So you need space on either side of your bus to maneuver the windows in and out. You need space to be able to lay the window frame out while you're working on it. I used a big folding trestle table. You can get them from Bunnings for like 50 bucks. They're not that expensive. And that gave me plenty of room to lay out the frame while I was fitting the seal and doing the work on it. You might decide just to do this one at a time. So take one window out, replace the seal, put it back together and stick it back in one at a time. I was doing all of the sliding windows in my bus and I just found it easier once I'd done the first practice one and figured out how to do it. I found it a little bit easier and more time efficient to do them all at once. So to take them all out, disassemble them all, and then replace all the seals, and then do the mastic, like have a bit of a production line going. But obviously in order to do that you need space to put all those windows. You need to make sure you've got a nice safe place to stack the glass panels after you take them out. So just make sure, like, take the time before you start to set up your space. Make sure you do have enough room to work and to store the windows while you're not working on them, because the last thing you want to do is be trying to work in an awkward, cramped space, you know, around glass, because you obviously don't want to risk breaking the window. So just take the time before you start to set up your space and make sure you've got plenty of room to work comfortably. So tip number two, taking the windows out is definitely a two-person job. It really does help to have an extra pair of hands for this job. Particularly when you're taking the windows out, you need someone on the outside just to support the window and stop it falling away while you're cutting the mastic on the inside. And also when you're putting the windows back in, the windows themselves are quite heavy, so it would be awkward for one person to lift in and out, particularly when you're putting them back in. You don't want to be getting mastic all over the sides of your bus and making a mess. So you want to be able to lift that window into the right position first time. So you really need two people to be able to do that. And also I found that I had my dad helping me with mine, and I found that after we'd put the window back into place, he actually had to push it, like put a little bit of pressure from the outside to push the window in far enough so that I could replace the clips on the inside. So if you were trying to do that yourself, that would be, it would be quite hard to replace some of those clips. You really need someone on the outside who can push the window into place. So it's definitely a two-person job. So it's just one of those things. Try, if you can, to get someone to be on hand, at least when you're taking the windows in and out, because yeah, it'd be really hard to do it on your own. So tip number three is take lots of photos and make lots of notes as you go. I did this to a certain extent, but I wish I'd done a lot more, and I wish I'd paid more closer attention to how the windows were put together when I was taking them out and pulling them apart, because there's lots of little bits and pieces. There's, you know, the frame itself, the way the glass goes in, there's that center bar, there's a little fuzzy piece of felt that goes in at one end of the center bar, there are little pieces on the sides of the windows and things, and it's easy to forget, especially if you're doing this job over a few days. When it comes time to put the windows back together, it's easy to forget or just not be sure exactly which way around some of those bits are supposed to go. So take your time as you're pulling the windows out. Have a really good look. Like there's this, even the little window clips that hold the windows in place go around a certain way. So make sure you have a look so that you know. Take a photo so that you know when you're putting them back in which way around they go. Take the time. You know, it doesn't matter if you end up with more photos and more notes than you need, but take it from me, it'll save you a lot of time when you come to put everything back together if you've got clear photos of how it's all meant to be. Tip number 4, when you're taking the windows out, you need to cut away the old mastic, which is the black sticky stuff that holds the window frame onto the outside of the bus. You need to cut that away with a Stanley knife. Make sure you've got a good quality knife to start with, and that you've got spare blades handy, because you actually do need to put a bit of pressure and use a bit of force to cut through that old mastic, I guess depending on how old your bus is and how long it's been there. But I found I had to use quite a bit of force, and even though I was using a pretty good quality Stanley knife, I still managed to snap a few blades in the process. So make sure you've got spare blades handy. Make sure the knife that you've got has a way of really securing that blade in tight so it's not moving around. The other thing I would mention is make sure you've got some safety goggles. In my first video where I showed me taking out the windows, the first window I did, I wasn't actually wearing my goggles because I didn't realize that there might be knife blades flying around, but I soon changed that. So for the rest of the windows, I made sure I had my goggles on, because the last thing you want is to snap a blade and have it flick back and hit you in the face. So just make sure you've got a good quality knife to start with, and you've got spare blades handy, because chances are you're going to snap a few in the process. Okay, tip number 5 is to keep absolutely everything and label everything. And by that I mean, you'll see when you come to pull out the windows that there's a lot of little bits and pieces. There's the clips that hold them in on the inside. There's little rubber window stoppers that you might want to take out. There's the center bar that's got a few screws at each end. And down the sides of the window, there are these little rubber pieces that are designed just to help, I think, keep the window in the right position on the outside of the bus. Some of those little pieces actually fell off when I was taking out the windows, and I didn't realize the first couple of windows I took out that I was losing these little pieces, and so I ended up not being able to find them all when I did realize the importance of them. And so I ended up with a few missing and had to work out a way of making some more by modifying the rubber stoppers and things. So make sure when you're taking the windows out that you just keep an eye out for any little pieces that might fall off. I kept everything in labeled Ziploc bags, so all the window handles, the clips, the screws for the center bar, I kept everything in Ziploc bags, and I labeled them so I knew which screws went with which piece. Again, it just makes it so much easier when you come to put the windows back in, that you've got all the little bits and pieces there ready to go, and you know which screws go with which bits. And I would also say keep absolutely everything until the job is 100% finished and you're sure that you won't need it. Like for instance, I was taking out a lot of my window stoppers because there were windows that I wanted to be able to fully open, and so I wasn't planning on putting all the stoppers back in, but I didn't throw them out. I actually kept them, and in the end I was really glad that I did, because when I lost a few of those little side rubber pieces off the windows, I was able to make more by modifying the extra rubber stoppers that I wasn't going to need. So if I'd thrown them out, I would have been really stuck as to what to use in place of those missing pieces. So just keep everything that comes off the windows until they're all back in and you're absolutely sure that you don't need them. I also labeled each of the window frames and the glass panels because when you're pulling them all apart, and if you're doing them all at once like I was, you'll end up with 7 different window frames and 14 pieces of glass, and it's just good to know which pieces of glass go in which frame. It just makes it all easier. So make sure you label everything as you go so that nothing gets mixed up. Tip number 6 is to use duct tape or something that's just as sticky to remove the old mastic. So getting the old mastic off the window frames and off the side of the bus is an absolute pain. It's horrible sticky stuff, and if it's like mine, it'll be covered in dirt and dust and just be really a pain to get off. I tried a few different things, but the thing that I found that worked best for me was to use duct tape. Basically, I just cut a piece of tape like that and stick it on the mastic to sort of start to pull it away, and then you can use the glob of mastic that's still on the tape to kind of pull the rest of it off. So that's what I found worked well for me, and that was the easiest way for me to get it off in the end. So I highly recommend just using a piece of duct tape. Makes the job just that much easier. Tip number 7 is I would advise using the genuine Toyota rubber seals. Now, if you're replacing the seals on the windows, there's a couple of different options. A lot of people buy generic Bailey channel, which is a molded sort of rubber seal that does fit the coaster windows. You buy it in like per meter lengths, and then you have to cut it to size to fit each window frame. The other option is to buy Toyota manufactured original factory seals. These, and instead of buying like a big roll by the meter and cutting it, each seal comes in a continuous loop with no joins that's designed specifically for a particular window. Now, a lot of people buy the Bailey channel because it's a lot cheaper. Like if you're doing all the windows in the coaster, it's actually several $100s cheaper to go with the generic channel than it is to buy the genuine Toyota seals. But there are a few downsides to using the Bailey channel. First of all, you do have to cut it, so you'll end up with a join somewhere in the frame. And the other thing is the Toyota seals come with all the drainage holes and everything pre-cut. And you can see in this image here that they actually do have a lot of holes in them. There's a lot of drainage holes along the bottom. There's also holes that are designed to fit around the window handles and the window jambs for the windows that slide open. And the seals also, in the place where the center bar goes, have like a special little V-shaped notch cut out of them. So basically, the Toyota seals are perfectly cut to fit around all the bits and pieces in the frame. If you buy the generic Bailey channel, you have to cut all those holes yourself. And it's totally doable. A lot of people do it, but it would be very time consuming, very fiddly, and yeah, it's just one more thing that you don't have to worry about if you get the genuine seals. The other reason I went for the Toyota ones was because in the Facebook bus groups that I'm in, there were quite a few people that had had issues with the generic Bailey channel. After they'd put it in, replaced all their seals, they still had issues with leaks, and then they ended up having to get the Toyota ones anyway, and once they put the Toyota ones in, it was a really good fit and they didn't have any problem. The last thing I want is to go through all this work and still have leaky windows, so I just thought I'd get the Toyota ones right from the get-go, and they were really easy to put in. It was really easy to see which way the seals had to go in because of all the holes and everything was cut. It was really easy to see how they fit into the frames. And, you know, I put all my windows in, first go, no issues with leaks whatsoever. So if you've got the budget, I would highly recommend just going straight for the genuine Toyota seals, because it just makes the job so much easier, and they're designed perfectly for the window. So you've got a much better chance of getting a perfect fit and a leak-free bus. Okay, tip number 8. When you're putting the windows back together, I found it really helps if you screw one end of the center bar in first. So the center bar is that piece that goes right in the middle of the window, and it actually sits between the two glass panels, so the panels kind of slide on either side of the center bar, and it's attached to the frame by 2 screws at each end. And the first time I tried to put a window back together without securing that center bar first, it was a real pain, because it's like, as you're having to slide the glass panels around a little bit to fit them back into the frame, that center bar moves a lot, and it's really hard to get to and realign when both the glass panels are in. So I found it much easier to either put the center bar in first, or at least get one panel in, put the center bar over the top of it, and screw one end of the center bar in place before you put the second glass panel on. And that way it doesn't move around anywhere near as much, and then it's much easier once you've got both glass panels in, just to line up the bottom of the other end of the center bar and put your last two screws in. It just works much better that way. So make sure you screw one end of the center bar in first before you put your second glass panel in. Tip number 9, make sure you use plenty of fresh mastic when you're putting the windows back in. I'd heard a lot of people having issues with leaks because they just didn't use enough mastic. I actually ran a bead of mastic around the edge of the window frame itself, and I also put another bead of mastic all the way around the edge of the window on the bus. So I ended up with quite a thick amount of mastic in between when I put the windows back in. Now, the downside to that obviously is quite a bit's going to get squeezed out around the edges, and you're going to have a lot more to clean up. But the last thing you want is to have gaps behind that window frame where there's not enough mastic to stop the water coming in. So make sure you use plenty to begin with. I was a little bit worried that I'd use too much in some places, but as I said, I got all my windows back in without any leaks. So I would recommend, erring on the side of caution and using more mastic than you think you're going to need. Yes, you'll have to clean up a little bit more, but you'll have way less chance of missing any spots and getting leaks. Okay, tip number 10, and this is something I really wish I'd known before I did my windows, and that is to wait a couple of days to let the mastic cure after you put the windows back in before you try and clean up the excess. I thought it would be better to clean it up straight away, and so that's what I did. I tried to clean up all that excess mastic pretty much as soon as I'd put the windows back in, and it was a horrible, messy job that literally took hours and hours, and used a lot of rags and a lot of terps, and it was just horrible. And I found out afterwards that if I'd waited a couple of days and just let the mastic cure a little bit, it's actually much easier to clean up, because you can just cut away the excess and pull it off in much the same way that I got rid of the old mastic. So it's totally fine to let it sit there for a couple of days and let it dry a little bit, and then clean it up, and you'll have a much easier time than I did. Okay, so that's my 10 tips for taking out the windows and replacing the seals. I hope you found that useful. And if you've done this job yourself before and you've got any extra tips or tricks for doing it and making the job a little bit easier, then leave them in the comments below, because there'll be other people that are watching this video that are thinking about doing the windows themselves, and it would be really helpful for them to get as much advice about how to make it easier. So leave it in the comments below if you've got any other tips. And that's all from me today. Hopefully my next video will be me being reunited with my bus. I'm very excited to see what it's going to look like with all the windows tinted. And I'm also really keen to get on and do the next bit of work on it. So thanks for watching, guys, and stay tuned for the next video.